Hiya! Okay, so this is section 2 of key area 2 of unit 2 of National 5 biology. Lots of numbers there. And it is based on neurons. Okay, so we're still looking at the nervous system in the control and communication key area. We're looking at the types of neurons and what they are and what they do.
Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the main types of neurons, so you're going to have to be able to name them, and how they actually carry a signal throughout your body to the point of you having the thing that tells you to do a response to you actually doing the response, and everything that happens in between.
Okay, now something that is important, we might interchangeably use the word neuron and nerve cell. They mean the same thing. So nerve cells are the same as neurons. So things you've got to be able to do: name the 3 types of neurons, state the type of signal that all neurons carry, state the role of each type of neuron. So there's 3 types of neurons, each one of them has an individual role. State what synapse is, state what type of signal is carried across a synapse, and then describe how a signal is passed from one neuron to another. That's going to be synapse related. Spoiler alert.
Okay, so there are 3 types of neurons that you need to know. You need to know the sensory neuron, you need to know the interneuron, and you need to know the motor neuron. And the useful way to remember these is they are like the Sims. It goes SIM is the order that they will be asked about in all of your questions. So you need to know the 3. You should really know them just in the order that they come in. So sensory neuron, interneuron, motor neuron. Sometimes you'll see the word neuron with an E on the end. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. American and English, I'm guessing, is the difference between them.
I think the E is English and I think the no E is American, but we seem to have gone with the American spelling. Yeah.
What you also need to know is the idea that along neurons travel electrical impulses. So if you get asked what kind of impulse or what kind of signal goes along a neuron, any kind of them, whether it's your sensory, inter or motor neuron, it is an electrical signal or an electrical impulse that travels down it.
Or even that's an important question. I'm thinking example of exam question, something like describe how neurons transmit signals, and you just say electrical impulses or electrical signals. Okay, so there's some key definitions here. They will make sense later, I promise. First key one is sensory receptor. So that's something that initiates a signal along sensory neuron, and it's found in sense organs such as skin. So on my skin, I have receptors for detecting touch signal. In my tongue, I have receptors for detecting taste. In my nose, I have receptors for detecting various smells. Okay, so you find sensory receptors in sense organs. An effector is an organ or a muscle that has a response to a signal, okay? So the idea is it's anything that can take an electrical signal from a neuron and have a response to it that's in your body already.
So looking at that first neuron that we talked about, so the sensory neuron, you very well might get asked to describe the role of these neurons. There's very often one of these questions where it'll say, tick one of the neurons, describe the function of that neuron. If that's the case, this is what you would say for the sensory neuron. So sensory neurons carry signals from a sense organ receptor. So examples, the receptors on your skin or in your eyes or your nose or your tongue. So they carry the signal from the sense organ receptor to the CNS. And you have to say that full sentence. Just learn it word for word and you will be grand.
It's a bit of a weird one, but our sensory receptors are crucial. We like to think that we feel stuff in our sense receptors. So for example, that when you touch something, you feel that in your finger. You actually don't. You touch something and a signal goes to your brain, and your brain generates oh, this finger is giving a signal off. If you block that sensory neuron or that sensory receptor, you get no feeling. Even if you know your finger is stuck in a flame or something like that, you get no signal, because the idea is that signal's not reaching your brain. You would still be generating the pain signal in your finger, but because it doesn't reach your brain, you don't detect the pain.
It's like how people who have been paralysed can get something done to their toe or their finger and they're like, I cannot feel it at all. It's because they've had something blocking that nervous signal travelling from what's getting this kind of sense to the brain, so they don't know that they're in pain.
Motor neurons carry signals from the central nervous system, so the CNS, to muscles or effectors or glands, okay? So muscles and glands are effectors, and that causes them to contract and move. So in the example here, a signal is coming down from the central nervous system into the muscles in the hand, and then that causes the hand to move away, because that signal from the central nervous system is saying move all the way down that motor neuron. When it hits the muscle contracts and moves out of the way.
Your classic example being that, oh no, I've touched a flame on top of a candle, because for some reason in exams they think that you do that. Is they draw that, and it's a case of your finger's obviously sensed that it's hot and your sensory neuron's done that, but your motor neuron has said, well, move the finger away from the flame. That's kind of the main example that seems to come up all the time.
Interneurons, this one's a bit of an odd one. Interneurons carry signals through the CNS or through the central nervous system. Ideally, or sort of, they are in the spinal cord mainly, but there are also some interneurons in the brain. So this is why we say they're in the central nervous system. And what their job to do is to act again like roads that basically carry signals up and down them from maybe sensory to motor neurons, sensory neurons to the CNS in the brain, but that is their role there. Okay.
Okay, and again, the order of neurons, I've already said this, it goes sensory, intermotor. You have to know that. That's the kind of thing when it comes to your reflex art questions, which we're about to get onto. You have to know that this is the order of neurons and the order of signaling. So signal goes along the sensory, around the inter, and back along the motor.
Okay, now a common extended response question is just, I don't know, say somebody has just stuck their finger into a pin. Describe the sequence of events going along the neurons during that time from sticking their finger with the pin to moving their hand away. So what is in front of you here is a series of answers to that question, but they are in the wrong order. We recommend you pause the video just now and try and get these numbered stages in the right order. So for example, if you think stage 4 is first, you write down the number 4 and then 1 and then 3, whichever stages you think come first. So pause it now and then we'll move on to the answers. So for the answers.
Yep, so your order is here. Hopefully if you tried to write that down, you got this right. If you didn't, I would take a note of this being in the correct order, because this is basically like your sample answer for if this comes up as a 4 or 5 mark question. If you can regurgitate this, you will get full marks in it. So the first thing that happens is a stimulus is detected by a sense organ. Then the signal is passed along the sensory neuron to the CNS. The brain processes the sensory information. The brain then issues a movement instruction. The signal is passed from the CNS to a motor neuron, and the motor neuron passes the signal to the muscle, which then moves. So if you can rewrite this, you will be fine. And again, it comes up in multiple choice questions. Sometimes it's putting these in the right order kind of thing, or it's came up in a extended response one before where it's listed all of these and said, write the numbers in the right order. So it comes up a lot, this stuff.
Okay, so the key parts in there is identifying that it's sensory neuron to the central nervous system and then central nervous system to the motor neuron, which then binds to an effector and then has some sort of effect. Those are key stages. Extra details, you might have covered these in class, is things like what a stimulus is, how stimuli are picked up by sensory receptors. But yeah, this is an example of an ideal answer to that type of question.
Okay, is it the final thing this video? I think it's the final thing.
It's sort of the last little section.
Yeah, so the final thing is the idea of synapses. Now, there's actually not too much about them, but there is most years a 2-mark question that comes up on this. And it's about the idea of signaling between neurons. So you need to realise that neurons do not touch. They come very, very, very close, but they all stop with a little gap between them. And that basically means the signal has to do something to change. It can't just jump magically from one neuron to the other. And this little gap between them is called a synapse. So between one neuron and the next there is a gap called a synapse, and a very special kind of signalling between them occurs that is slightly different from the electrical signalling that occurs along a neuron. So yeah, again, that is a synapse. So the synapse, it is just the gap. It's the empty space between them.
Common exam question is, here's a picture of 2 neurons. What is the name of area X? And they point at the gap, and you need to remember synapse. Okay, now electrical impulses can't jump this gap, so the signal has to cross in a different form. Now the signal is carried across by something called, we just call it at this stage, chemical messengers. Your teacher might have mentioned this idea of neurotransmitters, but at National 5 level, all you need to know is it's chemicals or chemical messengers that cross that gap. So we're going electrical on the top neuron, chemicals cross that gap, and then electrical signal is generated at the bottom neuron there. Okay, now this means the signal slows down a little bit because electrical signals, super, super, super rapid. Chemical messengers, a little bit slower, but then when we get to the other side and generate electrical, very, very, very quick again. Again, think about how fast neurons or nerves manage to transmit signals. When you move your hand, it should move at pretty much the same time as you think about it. Okay, so say you've got your hand flat on the table or something like that and you want to move a finger, it moves at the same time as you think about that. Now, it's not the same time. There is a tiny, tiny delay, but it's so small you don't even notice it. That is how fast a signal is coming from your brain, down into your spinal cord, down your arm, all the way to the tip of your finger to allow your hand to move.
And again, here's another diagram. You can be showing a diagram of a synapse in lots of different ways. So the idea, the bit on the left, the yellow bit on the left is the first neuron, so maybe that's your sensory neuron. That gap between them is obviously the synapse, and the next bit is your next neuron. So if it was a sensory in the first place, it'd be your inter in that place. And it is those little chemical messengers, again, sometimes known as neurotransmitters, but we're going to call them chemical messengers.
You don't need to know that word, neurotransmitter.
We're just going to call them chemical messengers, and they travel across the synapse until they reach the next neuron.
Okay, so important terms from this little section. The sensory neuron carries nervous signals from sensory receptors to the central nervous system, or CNS.
Okay. The interneuron operates solely within the CNS and it processes the information from the senses.
The motor neuron carries nervous signals from the CNS, the brain and spinal cord, to effectors like these things here.
Okay. An effector is just a muscle or a gland in general.
And a synapse is a gap between two neurons that chemicals cross, or chemical crosses.
Okay, so we've got to the end of this video now. That is the end of the nervous control part of hormone.
Oh no, we've still got we got reflexes to do still.
Oh, we still got reflexes.
There's one more video on reflexes.
Oh, I thought we'd done that. That's where my brain's at. So we're not done, but we're nearly done. So you should be able to name the 3 types of neurons, which are what?
Oh, sensory, intermotor.
Yeah. You should be able to state the type of signal that is carried down a neuron.
Electrical impulse.
You should be able to state the role of each type of neuron.
Sensory carries sense signals from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Inter carries signals through the central nervous system. And motor carries signals from the central nervous system to effectors.
Okay. You should be able to state what a synapse is.
Gap between 2 neurons.
You should be able to state what type of signal is carried across the synapse. You're too keen. And you should be able to describe how a signal is passed from one neuron to another.
Across a synapse with chemicals crossing the synapse gap.
That's your classic 2-mark question, is describe how a signal is passed. And you get a mark for saying across a synapse and a second mark for saying by chemical messengers.
Okay, so the last video on this half section is reflexes. After that video, we then look at hormonal control. I did warn you, this key area is a big one. Yeah.